There comes a moment in every man's life when he finally realizes that less is more. Not less effort, but less chasing. Less reacting. Less talking just to fill the silence. And that's the moment everything starts to shift. Because the second you go quiet, she starts to wonder. Not because you're playing games. But because silence is power. Silence is confidence. Silence says, I don't need to beg for attention. I don't need to explain my worth. I don't chase chaos, I attract peace. You see, a woman doesn't start losing her mind because you're being rude. She starts to lose her mind when she realizes. You're not waiting anymore. You're not asking anymore. You're not trying to prove anything. You've gone still. Cold. Stoic. And she's left spinning, wondering. Did I lose him? Why isn't he texting back? What is he thinking? Who is he with? And here's the brutal truth. The less you give emotionally to someone who is taking you for granted, the more valuable your presence becomes. Because in your silence, she hears everything she's been ignoring. Every warning. Every boundary you softly set. Every piece of self-respect you were holding back. Your silence is not emptiness. It is a mirror, forcing her to see what she refused to. And that's when it hits her. She'll scroll back through old messages. Reread conversations. Obsess over your last words. Analyze your tone. All because you stopped giving your energy to someone who didn't deserve the front row seat in your life. But let me be clear, this isn't about revenge. It's not about manipulation. It's about emotional discipline. It's about walking away from disrespect with quiet strength, not loud anger. It's about holding your frame like a man who knows, if she doesn't value your presence, your absence will teach her better than your words ever could. So the next time you're tempted to chase, pause. Go quiet. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop texting when she pulls away, the moment you stop reacting to her silence with panic, that's when she starts to feel it. The weight of losing a man who finally decided his peace was worth more than her confusion. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to remove your attention. And watch what happens when a man chooses silence, especially in emotionally charged situations. It sends a message louder than words ever could. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of power. It's a signal that you're in control, not only of the situation but of yourself. When you don't rush to fill the silence with justification, begging, or emotional outbursts, you're showing the world, and the woman in front of you, that your worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. Confidence isn't always loud. In fact, true confidence is most often quiet. It's the kind that doesn't need to announce itself because it already knows its value. When you go quiet, it forces her to feel the weight of your absence. It shows that you don't need to prove yourself or win her over. It shows that you're not desperate for her attention. Most men crumble when a woman pulls back, instantly chasing, texting, asking what went wrong. But the man who remains silent? He becomes a mystery. He becomes something rare in a world full of emotionally impulsive behavior. He becomes the man she can't quite figure out, and that's powerful. Because people chase what they can't fully understand. And when your silence is strategic, calm, and rooted in self-respect, it becomes magnetic. Silence shows you don't fear loss. That's one of the biggest indicators of confidence. Most people are terrified of losing someone, and so they overcompensate, they talk too much, text too often, and over-explain themselves into a corner. But a man who can be quiet when things don't go his way is a man who has trained his emotions. He doesn't react, he responds. And sometimes the best response is no response at all. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to walk away from chaos without feeding it. It's easy to speak. It's harder to hold your ground in silence when every part of you wants to react. But when you do, that's when she sees your value. That's when she realizes you're not like the rest. You don't chase confusion. You don't try to force your presence where it's not appreciated. You don't play the fool just to win back temporary affection. You know who you are. You know what you bring. And if she can't see it, your silence becomes the lesson. What makes silence even more powerful is that it cannot be argued with. Words can be twisted, debated, or misunderstood. But silence? It's undeniable. It lingers in the air. It makes her feel the gap you've left. And in that gap, she begins to understand what she once took for granted. Not because you told her, but because your absence did the talking. Silence isn't weakness. It's restraint. It's the decision to let your actions, or inactions, speak for themselves. A confident man doesn't fear being misunderstood. He trusts that the right people will feel his value, even in silence. And those who don't? They were never meant to stay. Women are naturally attuned to emotional shifts, even the subtle ones. It's not about being overly sensitive, it's about intuition. Most women have developed a keen sense for changes in tone, behavior, and energy, often picking up on things a man hasn't even verbalized. When you were once consistently available, emotionally open, or quick to respond, and suddenly you're quieter, more withdrawn, or less reactive, she doesn't just notice it, she feels it. And that feeling can be powerful. It can trigger curiosity, confusion, and sometimes even panic. Because the moment your emotional rhythm changes, it disrupts the pattern she was used to. When a woman is used to your presence, your attention, your emotional engagement, and you suddenly shift into stillness or silence, it doesn't go unnoticed. That shift, whether intentional or instinctive, sends ripples through the emotional space between you. She starts asking herself questions. Is something wrong? Is he upset with me? Did I go too far? And sometimes, even if she pulled away first, your emotional withdrawal becomes more impactful than hers. Why? Because she was expecting you to chase, to react, to fight for the connection. When you don't, it creates emotional tension, and tension is the birthplace of desire, curiosity, and even regret. That change in energy speaks louder than any message you could send. She'll notice you're not the first to text anymore. She'll notice the tone in your replies has cooled. She'll notice that your eyes don't linger the same way, that your words aren't as emotionally rich. These aren't things you have to announce, she'll pick them up instinctively. The sudden absence of emotional effort from a man who once gave freely is often more jarring than any argument. It feels different. And different makes people think. It forces reflection. This emotional shift taps into a deeper psychology. People, especially women, respond to patterns. When that pattern breaks, especially if they've been emotionally conditioned to expect a certain behavior, it opens a gap in their expectations. And in that gap, emotions intensify. The absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. And she'll start to remember things she overlooked. Words you said. Kindness you gave. Energy she dismissed. Because now it's not there. And she feels it in a way that's hard to explain, but impossible to ignore. A man who controls his emotional output without becoming cold or cruel, but simply more reserved and discerning, becomes harder to read. And what's hard to read becomes interesting. That emotional shift can cause her to reevaluate everything. Not because you tried to manipulate her, but because your energy is no longer pouring into a space where it wasn't being appreciated. And when that happens, she starts to reconsider. She starts to feel the shift in the air between you. And once a woman feels that change, she rarely forgets it. Because emotional contrast creates emotional impact, and that's what lingers long after words have faded. Withdrawing your energy from a situation, especially from a woman who once had your full attention, is one of the most powerful moves you can make. It doesn't require drama. It doesn't need a speech. It just needs emotional discipline. When you stop investing your time, attention, and emotional availability, something shifts, and it shifts hard. Because your energy is more than just your words. It's your presence. It's your availability. It's how often you respond, how much you care, how deeply you listen, how much you give even when nothing's being given in return. And once that energy is no longer flowing toward her, she notices the vacuum it leaves behind. Most men don't understand how valuable their energy is. They throw it around carelessly, constantly trying to win over women who are half invested, constantly chasing validation from someone who barely shows appreciation. But when a man finally realizes that his energy is a limited resource, not something to be handed out to anyone who demands it, that's when he starts moving differently. He stops entertaining mixed signals. He stops giving 100% to someone giving him 40%. And that change doesn't go unnoticed. Women are deeply affected by the withdrawal of masculine energy. When a woman is used to being the center of your emotional world, getting your attention, your time, your compliments, your concern, and suddenly you go still, it throws her off balance. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that confronts her with a truth: your presence was not guaranteed. You were giving her something valuable, and now it's gone. That absence becomes louder than any argument, and it forces her to reflect on how she treated you when she had access to your full self. There's something about quiet detachment that speaks volumes. Not slamming the door. Not yelling. Just closing off the energy supply. You no longer light up when she calls. You no longer text back instantly. You're no longer emotionally available for her confusion, her games, or her coldness. And in that moment, she begins to feel what it's like to miss you, not because you vanished, but because you stopped feeding her emotionally. What makes energy withdrawal so powerful is that it doesn't just punish bad behavior, it highlights it. It draws a clear line in the sand. It shows that you won't keep giving to someone who keeps taking. It communicates your standards without ever needing to explain them. The very act of withholding your energy becomes a reflection of your value. It says, I know what I offer. I'm not wasting it here anymore. When your energy stops flowing toward her, she may not say anything right away. But internally, the shift is happening. She'll feel the loss of emotional security. She'll feel the silence where your attention used to live. And whether she admits it or not, that feeling hits deeper than any words ever could. Because she's no longer feeling you, and that's when she realizes what she had. Silence is one of the most powerful tools a man can use when words are no longer respected. It's not about being passive-aggressive or trying to punish someone, it's about stepping back and allowing the other person to face the echo of their own actions. When you go silent after being emotionally available, it forces her to reflect in a way that constant conversation never could. Words can be debated, defended, or ignored. But silence? Silence lingers. It hangs in the air. It creates an emotional vacuum that cannot be filled with noise. And in that vacuum, the mind begins to wander, to question, to remember. When you stop reaching out, stop over-explaining, stop justifying your presence, it gives her time to sit with her own behavior. The things she said. The things she didn't say. The way she treated you when you were fully there. And now, with you no longer giving her your energy, she starts to notice just how much space you actually took up. She starts to realize how your attention was consistent, how your emotional availability was rare, how your presence brought calm, security, or intensity. All of that gets highlighted the moment it's gone. This reflection doesn't always happen right away. At first, she might feel confused or even indifferent. But silence has a way of stretching time. Days go by, and the absence becomes more noticeable. She starts to replay conversations, examine the tone of your last message, scroll through your social media, maybe even read old texts. Why? Because silence pushes her inward. It doesn't give her anything new to react to, so she's left with only what she already has. And that makes her replay it over and over, searching for what changed, what she missed, and most importantly, what role she played in your decision to pull back. A woman who may have overlooked your value begins to feel it in your silence. Not because you said anything, but because your silence exposes the parts of the relationship she took for granted. It makes her sit with the consequences of her emotional choices. Did she pull away emotionally? Was she disrespectful? Did she expect too much and give too little? These are the questions that silence forces into her mind. And those questions often hurt more than anything you could have said out loud. The beauty of silence is that it's rooted in control. You're not reacting out of anger. You're not trying to manipulate. You're simply choosing not to participate in a dynamic that no longer serves you. And in doing that, you become a mirror. You reflect back her behavior without saying a word. That reflection becomes inescapable. It's in the space where your voice used to be, in the moments when she expects a text and gets nothing, in the nights she checks her phone and finds only quiet. That's when it hits her. Not all at once, but gradually, and deeply. Choosing silence or emotional distance in response to someone's behavior isn't about playing games, it's about self-respect. It's about valuing your time, your presence, and your emotional energy enough to stop pouring it into a space where it's not appreciated. Too often, when a man pulls back or sets boundaries, he's accused of being manipulative or playing hard to get. But there's a massive difference between trying to get a reaction and simply refusing to tolerate treatment that undermines your worth. Self-respect isn't a tactic, it's a standard. And when a man honors that standard, everything he does shifts with purpose and clarity. There comes a point where continuing to engage, continuing to argue, continuing to prove your point becomes not only exhausting but degrading. Because every time you chase someone who's pulling away, every time you explain your value to someone who refuses to see it, you're giving away pieces of yourself. And the more you give without return, the more you bleed self-respect. That's not love. That's self-abandonment. Respecting yourself means knowing when enough is enough. It means having the courage to stop forcing your presence into a space that doesn't welcome it, even if you still care deeply. When you walk away, when you go quiet, when you stop explaining yourself, it's not a move to manipulate emotions. It's a decision to protect your own. Because a man who respects himself doesn't tolerate being half-loved. He doesn't wait around for someone to make up their mind about him. He doesn't stay in conversations where he has to beg to be heard. He knows his value, and he refuses to keep offering it where it's not reciprocated. That isn't playing a game. That's having standards. And people with standards are often misunderstood by those who benefit from their lack. A woman who truly values you won't interpret your silence or distance as manipulation, she'll understand it as a boundary. She'll recognize that you're not reacting out of spite, but out of strength. And the ones who don't get it? They were never meant to be close to you anyway. Because self-respect repels the wrong people and attracts the right ones. It filters your world, not with words, but with action. When you move in self-respect, you stop needing to control outcomes. You no longer chase closure. You don't need to win someone back or make them feel what they did wrong. Your silence speaks for you. Your absence becomes your statement. And ironically, that's often when people start to see your value the most, when you're no longer offering it freely. Not because you're punishing them, but because you've finally started choosing yourself. You've stopped showing up for people who stopped showing up for you. And in that choice, you find peace. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. You can't force love, loyalty, or respect. But you can live in a way that demands them by how you treat yourself. That's not a game. That's growth. There's a lesson in your absence that your presence could never teach. When you're constantly available, always showing up, always giving, it's easy for people to start taking you for granted. They get used to the comfort of your presence, the reliability of your attention, the warmth of your support. But the truth is, people often don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. Your absence becomes a mirror. It reflects your value more clearly than your constant presence ever could. It forces others to confront what life feels like without you, and that contrast can be far more powerful than anything you could say or do. When you're always there, your energy becomes background noise. It's just part of the atmosphere, expected and overlooked. But when you remove yourself from someone's life, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, it shakes their emotional world. Suddenly, the things you used to do become noticeable by their absence. The good morning texts, the check-ins, the emotional support, the attention to detail, the way you made her feel safe or seen, it all comes into focus when it's no longer present. That's when the realization hits, you were never just an option. You were an experience. People can become blind to your value when you hand it to them every day. They assume it will always be there, that you'll keep showing up no matter how they treat you. But once you step away, once you go silent, they're left with the empty space where your presence used to be. And in that space, reflection begins. They start to remember the things they didn't say, the appreciation they didn't show, the effort they didn't return. Your absence makes them face those truths in a way your words never could. There's a deep power in choosing to walk away without anger. It's calm, it's quiet, but it's undeniable. It says, I gave you something meaningful, and you didn't see it. So now, I'm gone. That message doesn't need to be shouted, it resonates in the silence. And what people come to learn is that your presence was never ordinary. It had weight, energy, depth. And now that it's gone, that emptiness starts to echo louder and louder. Sometimes, you have to leave to be truly seen. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because staying would only continue a cycle of disrespect or indifference. Your absence teaches self-awareness. It teaches loss. It teaches value. It teaches people to look inward and recognize their role in your distance. The clarity that comes when you're no longer emotionally available is often the only thing that opens someone's eyes to what they had all along. By disappearing from a place where you were once fully present, you allow someone to feel your worth in a way they couldn't before. Because words fade. Actions are forgotten. But emotional absence? That lingers. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It simply leaves, and in doing so, it teaches, here's a powerful and emotionally compelling ending for your speech the moment you go quiet. She'll start losing her mind. So when the moment comes, and it will, when you finally stop explaining, stop chasing, stop trying to prove your worth, and instead you go silent, everything changes. She'll feel that silence echo louder than any words you ever spoke. She'll start to remember the way you used to show up, how your presence made her feel, and how your energy used to pour.